Look at a family tree. Any family tree. You see branches, you see lines that continue and lines that stop. A great-great-uncle who had no children, a branch that ends. Now imagine a family tree for every human-like creature that ever lived. A hominin family tree. It would be a huge, sprawling thing, full of branches. And almost all of them are dead ends. There were the Australopithecines like Lucy. There was Homo habilis, the toolmaker, Homo erectus, who walked out of Africa long before we did. And then there were our closer cousins, the ones who lived at the same time we did. The Neanderthals in Europe and Asia, the Denisovans in Siberia, the tiny Homo floresiensis in Indonesia, the so-called hobbits. For most of human history, the world was shared. We were not alone. Now we are. We are the only branch left on that entire sprawling tree. Every other kind of human is gone. So, what happened? Why us and not them? Were we better? Smarter, faster, stronger? Was our victory inevitable, written in our genes, or was it something else? Did we just get lucky? Did we win the evolutionary lottery by a fluke or roll of the cosmic dice? This isn't an easy question. The evidence is buried under thousands of years of dirt and ice. But the more we dig, the more it seems that luck played a much bigger role than we like to admit. Let's start with the classic story, the one we told ourselves for a long time. It's a simple, heroic story. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. We were special. We had bigger brains, better language, a spark of creativity that others lacked. Around 70,000 years ago, we exploded out of Africa. We were the protagonists of the story. Everywhere we went, the other lesser humans just couldn't compete. The brutish Neanderthals, stuck in their old ways, were no match for our superior intellect and advanced tools. We were the smart kids on the block, and we simply outthought them. We were destined to inherit the Earth. There are pieces of truth in that story. Something did happen to our species around that time. Archaeologists call it the cognitive revolution. It's not that our brains physically got bigger overnight. It's that we started using them in a new way. We started thinking with symbols. What does that mean? It means a sound isn't just a sound anymore. It's a word. A word that can represent something that isn't there. You can talk about the lion that was here yesterday. You can talk about the lion you might see tomorrow. You can talk about the spirit of the lion. You can create a story about a lion god who is the ancestor of your tribe. This is a superpower. It allows for fiction, and fiction is what allows us to cooperate in huge numbers. You can't get 100 chimpanzees to work together on a single task. They don't know each other. They don't trust each other. But you can get 100,000 humans to build a pyramid or fight in an army. Why? Because they all believe in the same story. A story about a god, a nation, a king. Neanderthals, it seems, didn't do this. Their social groups were small. They were based on family, on personal relationships. You cooperate with people you know and trust. This works fine, but it has a limit. Our ability to create and believe in shared myths allowed us to break that limit. Our tribes were bigger. Our social networks were wider. If one group was starving, they could rely on another group 50 miles away, not because they were close relatives, but because they shared a belief. They were part of the same tribe. This abstract thought also showed up in our art. We painted on cave walls. We carved little figurines from mammoth ivory. A half-man, half-lion statue found in a German cave is 40,000 years old. It shows an imagination at work, the ability to conceive of something that doesn't exist in the real world. For a long time, we saw no comparable art from Neanderthals. This was our smoking gun. We were the artists, the storytellers. They were not. And then there's our technology. We had a more diverse toolkit. We invented the spear thrower, the atlatl. It's basically a stick that helps you throw a spear. It acts as a lever, extending your arm. It lets you throw a spear faster, farther, and with more force. You can hunt from a safer distance. We invented the bow and arrow. We invented tiny, delicate bow needles. A needle doesn't sound very impressive, but it means you can sew together fitted clothing. You can make layers. You can stay warmer and drier. You can survive better in a harsh climate. So the case seems strong. We were better communicators, better cooperators, better innovators. We had the imagination to create art and the ingenuity to create superior technology. It seems like an open and shut case. We won because we were better, but the world is rarely that simple. And the more we find, the more complicated and messy the story gets. The more it looks like our superiority was either not as great as we thought, or it was only superior in very specific circumstances. And that's where luck comes in. First, let's look at our supposedly brutish cousins, the Neanderthals. The old image of them as hunched over cavemen is just wrong. It was based on the first skeleton they found, which happened to be an old man with arthritis. Neanderthals were incredibly tough and well adapted. They survived in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. That's far longer than Homo sapiens has been around. They were not failures. They were a massive success story. Their brains were just as big as ours, sometimes bigger. The shape was a bit different, but there's no evidence at all that they were less intelligent. They were skilled hunters. They took down mammoths and woolly rhinos. You don't do that with brute force alone. It takes planning, cooperation, and a deep understanding of your environment and your prey. Did they lack our creativity? We used to think so, but then we found evidence that complicated things. In Spain, we found cave paintings that were 65,000 years old. That's 20,000 years before Homo sapiens are thought to have arrived in Europe. The artists had to be Neanderthals. They were mixing pigments and painting symbols on cave walls. We found eagle talons that had been cut and marked, likely worn as jewelry. We found shells with holes drilled in them, also clearly for personal adornment. They were thinking in symbols too. Maybe not in the same way or to the same extent as us, but the spark was there. They were not mindless brutes. They were people. Their technology wasn't primitive either. It was just different. They were masters of a technique called levallois, where you carefully prepare a stone core to knock off a perfect flake to use as a spear point or a scraper. It's a difficult, multi-step process. It shows foresight and skill. They didn't have sewing needles, that's true. But they survived ice ages. They must have had effective clothing, perhaps simple cloaks and wraps made of animal hides. Their tools were perfectly suited to their lifestyle of close-range hunting in forested environments. So if they weren't dumb or unimaginative, why did they disappear? Why did we survive? Maybe the difference between us wasn't a huge gulf in intelligence. Maybe it was a matter of degrees. And maybe those small differences only matter when the world got turned upside down. This is where luck really enters the picture. The luck of the climate. We didn't expand into a stable world. We walked into a world of chaos. The last ice age wasn't just a long, steady period of cold. It was incredibly volatile. The climate would swing wildly, sometimes in the space of a few decades. A place that was a cold, dry steppe could become a mild forest. Then it could snap back to being a frozen tundra. These were massive, world-altering changes. Neanderthals were specialists. They were superbly adapted to the cold, forested environments of Ice Age Europe. Their bodies were stocky and muscular, a build that's great for conserving heat. Their hunting techniques were designed for ambushing large animals in woodlands. But what happens when those forests disappear? What happens when they are replaced by open plains? Your entire way of life, your entire toolkit, your entire physiology suddenly becomes a disadvantage. And Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were generalists. We evolved in the diverse climates of Africa. We lived in savannas, in forests, in coastal areas. We were a jack-of-all-trades species. Our bodies were leaner, better for long-distance running. Our technology, with things like spear throwers and bows, was better suited for hunting in open country. We weren't perfectly adapted to any one environment, which meant we were pretty good at adapting to all of them. So when the climate went haywire, the specialists suffered. The generalists had an advantage. Was our adaptability a skill? Yes. But was the chaotic climate that made that skill so important a matter of luck? Absolutely. We happened to have the right set of skills for the specific crazy period of history in which we met our cousins. If the climate had been stable, Neanderthals might still be in Europe. The world might look very different. There's another piece of massive, catastrophic luck to consider. About 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano called Toba in what is now Indonesia erupted. It was one of the largest eruptions in the planet's history. It blasted so much ash and sulfur into the atmosphere that it likely caused a volcanic winter, drastically cooling the planet for years, maybe even centuries. This was a global catastrophe. It would have devastated ecosystems and caused mass die-offs. At the time, there were hominin populations all over the world. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo erectus maybe still hanging on in some places, and us, Homo sapiens, mostly in Africa. It's possible this single event pushed many populations to the brink of extinction. One theory suggests that the Toba eruption created a genetic bottleneck for our species. Perhaps only a few thousand of us survived. This small, isolated population might have then developed the key cognitive or social traits that later gave us an edge. Or maybe we just got lucky. Maybe our particular corner of Africa was less affected. Maybe the Neanderthal and Denisovan populations were hit harder. A single random geological event could have reshuffled the entire deck, dealing us a better hand just by chance. We can't know for sure, but it's a powerful reminder that our fate has been shaped by forces far beyond our control. A volcano on the other side of the world could be the reason you are here today. Then there is the simple, brutal luck of numbers and geography. The story of our expansion isn't one of a single heroic army marching out of Africa. It was likely a slow, messy process, a trickle of small bands moving out generation after generation. And Africa is huge. It has a much larger land area than Europe. It could have supported a much larger total population of Homo sapiens than the population of Neanderthals in Europe. This creates a simple demographic advantage. Even if Neanderthals were our equals in every way, we might have just swamped them with sheer numbers. Imagine two populations living side by side. If one has just a slightly higher birth rate or a slightly lower infant mortality rate over thousands of years, that tiny advantage becomes overwhelming. The first group will eventually replace the second. It's not a war, it's just math. Why might we have had this advantage? Maybe our more varied diet made us healthier. Maybe our wider social networks acted as a safety net, meaning fewer groups starved during a hard winter. Maybe our long-distance projectile weapons meant our hunters died less often. The reasons could be small, but the cumulative effect would have been enormous. It's the luck of coming from a larger, more stable core population. We could afford to lose a few pioneer groups on the frontier. The Neanderthals, with their smaller, more isolated populations, could not. A few bad seasons, a new disease, and a whole group could vanish forever, with no one to replace them. And that brings up disease. When populations that have been separated for a long time meet, they exchange germs. We see this in modern history. When Europeans came to the Americas, they brought diseases like smallpox and measles, which devastated the native populations who had no immunity. It was a biological catastrophe. Could something similar have happened on a smaller, slower scale when we met the Neanderthals? We came from tropical Africa. They came from cold Eurasia. We would have been carrying different pathogens. It's entirely possible that we brought with us tropical diseases to which the Neanderthals had no resistance. Or perhaps it was the other way around, and we picked up diseases from them. We know from our DNA that we did interbreed, so we were definitely close enough to share microbes. The winner in this microbial war could have been determined by pure luck, the chance mutations of viruses and bacteria. This interbreeding is another thing that complicates the simple story of us versus them. We found them, and we had children with them. Most people today whose ancestry is from outside of Africa have about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. People from parts of Asia and Oceania have Denisovan DNA as well. This is a strange and profound fact. We didn't just wipe them out, we absorbed them. They are not entirely gone. A small piece of them lives on in us. This makes the story less about a replacement and more about a merger. It suggests we saw them as people you could have children with, so why did their distinct populations vanish while ours thrived? Perhaps it was a fertility gap. Maybe when a Homo sapiens female and a Neanderthal male had a child, the offspring was fertile. But maybe when a Neanderthal female and a Homo sapiens male had a child, the male offspring was sterile. This happens sometimes when closely related but distinct species interbreed. If this were the case, over time, the Neanderthal gene pool would just get diluted and absorbed into the much larger sapiens gene pool. We wouldn't have had to kill them, we could have just outbred them. This would be another form of luck. The random, quirky genetics of hybridization. So what does this all add up to? It seems our success wasn't due to one single massive advantage. It was a mosaic of small advantages that only became decisive when combined with a healthy dose of good luck. Think of it like this. Imagine two equally skilled companies competing. One is a huge corporation with a diverse portfolio that's us. The other is a smaller specialized company that does one thing incredibly well, that's the Neanderthals. In a stable market, the specialized company might do just fine or even better. But then a massive, unpredictable market crash happens, a chaotic climate shift. Then a factory blows up in a random accident, the Toba eruption. The specialized company with all its eggs in one basket goes bankrupt. The huge corporation, with its deep cash, reserves a large population in Africa and diverse products. Our generalist adaptability is able to weather the storm and buy up the remains of its competitor. Was the big company better? Or just bigger and luckier? The answer is both. Its size and diversity were its key skills, but those skills only led to total victory because of a series of lucky breaks and external shocks. This is a more humbling way to see our place in the world. We are not the inevitable pinnacle of evolution. We are the improbable survivors. We are the last twig on a branch that survived the storm, while other, stronger-looking branches were snapped off by a gust of wind that just happened to blow in the right direction at the right time. Our flexible minds, our language, our cooperation, these were our skills. They were real and they were important. But they were deployed on a stage set by forces of pure chance, the random fluctuations of the planet's orbit that drove the ice ages, the tectonic pressures that caused a volcano to erupt, the chance mutations that gave us a slight demographic edge. We are a product of skill and luck, so intertwined, it's impossible to separate them. Our adaptability was a skill, but the unstable world that made it so valuable was a matter of luck. Our large social networks were a skill, but the sheer size of the African continent that allowed for a large population base was a geographical accident. Recognizing the role of luck is important. It strips away the arrogance of destiny. It reminds us that we are not the masters of the universe, but rather the fortunate beneficiaries of a long and bloody game of chance. The world was not made for us. We just happened to be the ones left standing when the music stopped. It also gives us a new lens through which to view our cousins. The Neanderthals and Denisovans were not failures on the path to humanity. They were alternative versions of humanity, successful, intelligent, and resilient people who faced a series of unlucky breaks. A different climate swing, a different volcanic eruption, a slightly different birth rate, and our positions could easily have been reversed. It could be Neanderthal archaeologists today digging up the strange, slender bones of a short-lived species of hominin from Africa and wondering, what happened to them? Were they just unluckier than us? Our survival is a story of contingency. If you were to rewind the tape of life and play it again, the odds of Homo sapiens ending up as the sole global hominin are incredibly small. We are an accident, a beautiful, creative, and often destructive accident, and being the sole survivors carries a heavy responsibility. The other branches are gone. We are the only ones left to carry the story of humanity forward. And we have to wonder, in the face of the massive environmental changes we are now creating ourselves, whether our luck is finally about to run out. The skills that got us here, our ability to cooperate and change the world around us, are now being tested in a way they never have been before. This time, we can't blame it on a volcano or an ice age. This time, it's on us. We have to make our own luck.